Stop it. Stop it at once. Edward Blackwood's voice cracked through the cavernous living room of his Beverly Hills mansion, sharp and cold as shattering glass. He stood frozen in the grand archway, his fists clenched at his sides, his body rigid with a white-hot fury. He was staring at a scene that felt like a profound violation, a trespass against the silent, ordered grief that had become the law of his house. His daughter, Chloe, 8 years old, was in her wheelchair in the center of the room, a genuine, radiant smile illuminating her face for the first time in months. And beside her, Marcus, the new driver he had hired just 3 weeks ago, was dancing. He moved with a gentle, fluid grace to the soft, rhythmic pulse of a bossa nova tune playing from his phone. The black man, tall and lean, held Chloe's small hand delicately, circling her chair with slow, measured steps, while she, in her seat, clapped along, her eyes sparkling with a joy Edward thought had been extinguished forever in the twisted metal of the car crash. "What in God's name do you think you are doing with my daughter?" Edward advanced into the room, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the marble floor, his presence sucking all the warmth out of the air. Marcus stopped dancing immediately, releasing Chloe's hand as if it were hot to the touch. The smile vanished from Chloe's face, instantly replaced by a look of confusion and fear. It was a transformation so swift and total that it physically pained Edward to see it, yet he couldn't stop the rage that fueled him. Marcus remained calm, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain." "Explain?" Edward spat the word, his voice dripping with indignation. "You were hired to drive a car, not to perform whatever this is." He gestured furiously toward the phone, which still whispered the gentle melody. "Turn that noise off, now!" Chloe began to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs that tore at Edward's heart, even as his anger surged. Marcus quickly retrieved his phone and silenced the music. The silence that fell was suffocating, heavy with unspoken accusations and a child's broken heart. Edward's gaze flickered from his weeping daughter to the driver, and he felt a tightening in his chest, a complex knot of grief, fear, and a prejudice he would never admit to himself. "Daddy, please," Chloe whispered, her voice small and choked with tears. "Marcus was he was teaching me how to dance like the other kids." "You can't dance," Edward snapped. The words were out before he could stop them, brutal and absolute. "You are in a wheelchair, Chloe. The sooner you accept that, the better." He saw Marcus's expression flicker, a subtle tightening around his eyes. But the man remained silent. There was something in his gaze, not anger, not fear, but a deep, unnerving understanding that Edward couldn't decipher. It was as if the driver could see right through the layers of wealth and power to the raw, terrified father beneath, as if he knew precisely the kind of pain that made a man so cruel. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice quiet and steady, carrying a calm authority that was completely at odds with his position. "May I have a word with you in private?" "There is nothing to discuss," Edward replied curtly, turning his back on him to signal the finality of the decision. "Get your things. You're fired." Marcus nodded slowly, a gesture of acceptance, not defeat. But before he turned to leave, he looked at Chloe one last time. "Remember what we talked about, little butterfly," he said softly. "Some butterflies fly differently, but they still fly." As Marcus walked toward the door, Edward noticed something that unsettled him. The man didn't seem surprised or desperate, as one would expect of someone who had just been summarily dismissed. There was a serenity in his movements, a quiet dignity that felt entirely out of place. It was as if he knew something Edward didn't. Chloe's sobs intensified, and Edward knelt beside her wheelchair trying to comfort her, but his words felt hollow and false, even to his own ears. "Why did you send him away?" she cried, her small hands balled into fists. "He made me feel normal again." Edward had no answer. For the 6 months since the accident that had stolen his wife's life and left his daughter paralyzed from the waist down, he had done everything by the book. He had hired the best physical therapists, the most renowned child psychologists, the most expensive specialists money could buy. He had filled their home with a rotating cast of experts, all of whom had failed to elicit a single, genuine smile from his grieving daughter. And then Marcus had appeared, a driver, a man hired to perform a simple, mechanical task. And in 3 short weeks, he had accomplished what the entire team of high-priced professionals could not. He had made Chloe laugh. Watching his daughter wipe her tears with the back of her hand, a profound and terrifying thought began to form in Edward's mind. He had just made a terrible mistake. There was something about the driver that didn't add up, something that had triggered an alarm in his analytical mind, but not the kind he had expected. It wasn't the alarm of a threat, but the unsettling feeling that he had just dismissed the most important person to walk into their lives since the tragedy. He had seen a black man in a driver's uniform touching his daughter, and his reaction had been instant, visceral, and deeply prejudiced. He had fired him not for what he did, but for who he was. And as he looked at his daughter's devastated face, Edward began to suspect that the consequences of that single, angry decision would be far greater than he could possibly imagine. 3 days passed. 3 long, silent, suffocating days since Marcus's dismissal. On the surface, the Blackwood mansion returned to its grim routine. The hushed footsteps of the staff, the sterile quiet of the long hallways, the absence of music. It was the cold, ordered world Edward had meticulously constructed to manage his grief. He threw himself into his work, a flurry of conference calls and market analyses, convincing himself with every closed deal that he had made the right decision. He was the protector of his family, the guardian of his daughter's vulnerability. He couldn't allow strangers, especially a man like Marcus, to get too close, to exploit their tragedy. But Chloe was not cooperating with his carefully laid plans for a return to normalcy. The fragile spark that Marcus had ignited in her had been extinguished, and a deeper, more stubborn darkness had taken its place. She refused to leave her room, pushing away the gourmet meals prepared by the private chef. She would cry whenever she heard the sound of a car in the long, winding driveway, her heart leaping with a hope that was crushed again and again. It wasn't Marcus. It was never Marcus. The team of expensive specialists reported a complete regression. "She's totally non-responsive, Mr. Blackwood," the physical therapist, a woman with a PhD from Stanford, explained over the phone. "She simply refuses to participate in any of the exercises. It's as if she's given up." Daddy, why won't Marcus come back?" Chloe asked for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Her small face was pale against the silk pillowcase, her eyes puffy and red. "We've discussed this, sweetheart," Edward said, his voice tight as he adjusted his tie in the reflection of the ornate bedroom mirror. A board meeting with Japanese investors loomed. The world of high finance did not pause for a child's sorrow. He wasn't the right fit for this household. But he understood me," Chloe murmured, turning her face to the wall, a small, heartbreaking gesture of dismissal. Meanwhile, across town, in a modest, clean apartment that stood in stark contrast to the Blackwood estate, Marcus Vance sat at a small kitchen table. He was typing calmly on a laptop, a high-end machine that seemed as out of place in the humble apartment as a diamond on a paper plate. His screen displayed a series of emails written in fluent English, French, and Portuguese, correspondences that a simple driver should have no business conducting. His phone rang. "Dr. Vance," a voice on the other end said, speaking in crisp academic French. "The university wishes to confirm your availability for the neuroplasticity lecture next week. I'll need to postpone for a few days," Marcus replied in the same language, his eyes never leaving the photo he had discreetly taken of Chloe on his phone, a picture from one of their dance lessons where she was laughing, her head thrown back in pure delight. "A special case has come up that requires my full attention." Edward Blackwood had never bothered to run a deep background check on Marcus. The employment agency had recommended him as highly qualified and experienced with high-profile families, and Edward, in his arrogance, had assumed they were referring only to his driving skills. Had he dug deeper, he would have discovered that the man he'd hired to chauffeur him around Beverly Hills held a PhD in neuroscience from the Sorbonne in Paris. He would have learned that Dr. Marcus Vance was a leading specialist in music and movement therapy for children with neurological trauma. And he would have learned that Marcus had abandoned a glittering academic career in Europe after a devastating personal tragedy. But there was more. Something that even the most thorough investigation would not easily reveal. Marcus knew the Blackwood family. He had known them for far longer than Edward could ever imagine. As Edward prepared to leave for his meeting, steeling himself against the sound of his daughter's quiet weeping, his personal assistant, a meticulous young man named Bruno, entered his study with a worried expression. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to report something." "Unusual," Bruno said, looking down at his tablet. "It's about the driver you dismissed, Marcus Vance." "What about him?" Edward asked impatiently. "Well, sir, he didn't contest the dismissal. He didn't ask for a reference. He didn't seem desperate in any way. He just left." Edward frowned. Marcus's calm, dignified reaction had been gnawing at him since it happened. "So, perhaps he had another job lined up." "That's just it, sir," Bruno said, hesitating. "I took the liberty of running some preliminary checks. It appears he has an advanced academic background. He's fluent in 4 languages and—" Bruno swallowed. "There are records of him working with special needs children in pediatric hospitals across Europe." A cold knot formed in Edward's stomach. "Why didn't you tell me this before I hired him?" "You didn't request a full background verification, sir," Bruno replied, his voice apologetic. "You said you just needed someone to drive." Edward vaguely recalled the interview. He had been rushed, impatient. He had seen a black man who was polite and spoke well, and that had been enough. He had made an assumption based on a man's color and his chosen profession, and the sheer ugly prejudice of that assumption was now beginning to dawn on him. That afternoon, Edward came home early. He found Chloe exactly as he had left her, a small, still figure in her bed, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured, lifeless garden. But this time, she was whispering to herself. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" he asked, approaching her bed. "The butterflies," she answered, her voice a dreamy whisper. She didn't turn to look at him. "Marcus taught me. He said some butterflies fly differently, but they still fly, like me." Edward felt the knot in his throat tighten. Those were Marcus's last words to her. Words of hope and acceptance, a stark contrast to his own brutal, "You can't dance." Later that night, long after Chloe had cried herself to sleep, Edward found himself drawn to the garage. It was where he used to see Marcus, meticulously cleaning the luxury cars, often humming a soft tune. The space was now eerily silent. But as he passed the town car, something on the passenger seat caught his eye. It was a slim leather portfolio that Marcus must have left behind. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain, Edward opened it. He expected to find personal papers, perhaps a resume or car registration. Instead, he found a collection of medical articles on childhood paralysis and music-based physical therapy. Tucked inside were pages of handwritten notes, all under the heading CB, Case Study, Chloe Blackwood. The notes were detailed, professional, and revealed a profound understanding of Chloe's specific condition, an understanding that went far beyond anything a driver should possess. There were diagrams of therapeutic exercises, progressions of musical keys adapted for mood elevation, and a comprehensive treatment plan that stretched out over several months. It was the work of a dedicated, brilliant specialist. At the very back of the portfolio, tucked into a flap, Edward found a faded photograph. It showed a younger Marcus, smiling, wearing a white doctor's coat. Beside him, in a hospital bed, was a beautiful blonde woman, her face pale but her smile radiant. The woman had the same piercing blue eyes as Chloe. It was his wife, Camilla, the woman who had died in the crash that had crippled their daughter. The photo was dated 6 years ago, taken at a hospital in Paris. On the back, a small, neat inscription in French: Dr. Marcus Vance, pediatric neurological trauma specialist, with his patient, Camilla Blackwood. Edward let the photograph fall from his trembling hands. The world tilted on its axis. Marcus wasn't just a skilled driver who had stumbled into their lives by chance. He had known Camilla, he had been her doctor, and now, 6 years later, he had mysteriously appeared to work in their home, at the exact moment Chloe needed him most. Every harsh word Edward had spoken, every dismissive glance, every ounce of his cold, prejudiced contempt now replayed in his mind, each one a fresh stab of shame. The man he had fired, the man he had treated as a subordinate, as a potential threat, was not an opportunist. He was, quite possibly, the only person in the world who truly understood how to help Chloe. And Edward, in his blind arrogance, had sent him away. The next morning, Edward Blackwood moved through his scheduled meetings like a phantom. He sat in the boardroom of his downtown LA skyscraper, surrounded by architects and investors, but he wasn't there. His mind was in a hospital room in Paris 6 years ago. The image of his wife, Camilla, smiling beside Dr. Marcus Vance, was burned onto the back of his eyelids. How was it possible? How could fate, or whatever cosmic force governed their lives, have brought his wife's former doctor to his doorstep, disguised as a driver at the precise moment his daughter was sinking into a black hole of despair? It couldn't be a coincidence. Coincidences were for lazy thinkers, and Edward was anything but. He abruptly cancelled his afternoon agenda. "Bruno," he said, his voice a low, urgent command as he stormed back into his private office. "I want a full, top-priority investigation into Marcus Vance. I want everything, every degree, every employment record, every address, every step he has taken for the past 15 years. Use the best private investigation firm we have on retainer. I don't care what it costs." Sir, may I ask about the urgency?" Bruno asked, adjusting his glasses, clearly taken aback by his boss's intensity. "I've discovered that our former driver is not who we thought he was," Edward replied, his hand still clutching the faded photograph he had taken from the portfolio, "and I need to know exactly who I've been dealing with." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Chloe's condition had worsened. She was refusing all food, had stopped speaking entirely, and was now running a low-grade fever that the family pediatrician couldn't explain. The physical therapist reported that during her session, Chloe had simply closed her eyes and refused to move, as if she had willed her own body into a state of shutdown. "It's psychosomatic, Edward," Dr. Evans, the pediatrician, explained over the phone, his voice heavy with concern. "It's as if she's lost the will to fight. Sometimes children who have experienced severe trauma form a very specific, very powerful emotional attachment. It becomes a lifeline if that connection is abruptly severed." "Are you suggesting my daughter is physically ill because I fired a driver?" Edward interrupted, his voice sharp with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "I am suggesting," Dr. Evans said carefully, "that you may have severely underestimated the importance of that man to your daughter's recovery." Late that afternoon, the encrypted report from the investigation firm arrived. Edward locked himself in his study, the silence of the mansion pressing in on him, and began to read. With every page, the certainties of his world crumbled further. Marcus Vance had graduated with top honors from Johns Hopkins Medical School. He had specialized in pediatric neurology in Paris, and for 6 years he had been a rising star at the Hôpital Necker Enfants Maladies, the very hospital where Camilla had been treated during a research trip she'd taken to Europe. But there was more, so much more. 3 years ago, Dr. Marcus Vance had lost his own daughter in a car accident. Luna Vance, aged 5, had died under circumstances chillingly similar to the crash that had taken Camilla and paralyzed Chloe. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Marcus had walked away from traditional medicine. He had resigned from his prestigious hospital post and begun developing unconventional therapeutic techniques, combining music, movement, and neuroplasticity to help traumatized children. The report was filled with links to his published scientific articles, citations in international medical journals, and something that made Edward's blood run cold. A translated interview Marcus had given to a French newspaper 2 years prior. In it, he spoke of his mission to find other children like his Luna, children let down by the rigid confines of medicine, and to offer them a second chance to smile. Edward's hand shook as he picked up his phone and dialed Marcus's number. It rang 4 times before a calm, familiar voice answered. "I imagine you've discovered who I am," Marcus said, his tone even, without a hint of surprise. "Why?" Edward demanded, his own voice a raw mix of anger and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me who you were from the beginning?" "Because men like you don't hire former neurosurgeons to drive their cars, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus replied, his voice devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple fact. "You hire drivers. And Chloe needed someone who could get close to her without raising alarms or creating expectations. She needed a friend, not another doctor in a white coat." "Suspicions? What kind of game are you playing with my family?" A deep sigh came from the other end of the line. "Mr. Blackwood, your wife Camilla came to see me professionally 6 months before the accident. She was researching alternative treatments for childhood paralysis." "Why? Chloe was born perfectly healthy." "She was," Marcus affirmed, "but Camilla knew there was a genetic risk, a latent neurological condition that had been identified during her pregnancy, one that could be triggered by severe physical trauma. She was preparing a preventative treatment plan just in case the worst ever happened. She made me promise that if Chloe ever needed me, I would do everything in my power to help her." The words echoed in the silent study, a confession that rewrote the entire history of his marriage, of his daughter's condition. Camilla had known. She had carried this secret, this fear, all by herself. She had prepared for a tragedy that hadn't yet occurred. "You're lying," Edward whispered, but the words had no conviction. "It's in her will, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said gently. "In the section your lawyers probably dismissed as the ramblings of an overly anxious pregnant woman. Camilla left specific instructions on how Chloe was to be treated in the event of paralysis." With trembling fingers, Edward navigated to the digital files of Camilla's will on his computer. He scrolled past the financial dispositions, the property trusts, to a section near the end he had barely glanced at titled Contingent Medical Directives. And there it was, on page 17. "In the event of neurological trauma or paralysis involving our daughter Chloe, I strongly recommend contacting Dr. Marcus Vance, a specialist in unconventional therapies. His methods may seem unorthodox, but they succeed where traditional medicine often fails." "My God," Edward breathed, letting the phone slip from his grasp. At that exact moment, Bruno appeared at the door, holding a folder. "Sir, there's something else you need to see. I found records of monthly payments your wife was making to a clinic in Paris. They were on an automatic debit from a joint account. They continued until last month." Edward took the documents. Camilla had been funding a pediatric rehabilitation clinic for years, a clinic where, the report stated, Dr. Marcus Vance served as a primary consultant. "He was watching us," Edward murmured, the full weight of it crashing down on him. "He was waiting." "Not watching, sir," Bruno corrected softly. "Waiting to be needed." The sheer scale of his own arrogance hit Edward with the force of a physical blow. He had dismissed, humiliated, and fired the one man in the world his wife had handpicked to save their daughter. He had treated a brilliant, grieving doctor, a man who had abandoned a celebrated career to honor a promise to a dead woman, as a common opportunist. And worse, he had done it all in front of Chloe, shattering the one genuine connection, the one ray of hope she had found since the accident. He snatched up the phone and called Marcus again. "I need you to come back." "It doesn't work that way," Marcus replied calmly. "I am not an employee you can dismiss and rehire at your convenience. I am a doctor who made a promise." "Then what do you want from me?" Edward asked, his voice cracking. "I want you to stop trying to control your daughter's healing and start participating in it. I want you to admit that you don't know what's best for her. And I want you to apologize, not to me, to her." As Edward struggled to process this, to swallow the bitter pill of his own pride, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was from Marcus. "Chloe asked me to send you this." It was a 3-minute video. In it, Chloe was in her wheelchair, in what looked like a bright, welcoming physical therapy room, the very clinic his wife had been funding. She was smiling, moving her arms in perfect sync with a soft, melodic piece of music. Her legs, though motionless, seemed to sway gently with the rhythm. Marcus was visible in the corner of the frame, guiding her movements with infinite patience and an encouraging smile. The message that accompanied the video was devastating in its simplicity. "She recorded this for you last week, back when she still believed you loved her more than you loved your own pride." Edward knew, in that moment, that he had lost more than an employee. He had lost his daughter's trust. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had the power to buy it back. But as he watched the video for the 5th time, a new kind of resolve began to form in his chest. Not the resolve to control, but the humility to learn. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the father Chloe truly deserved. Across town, Marcus hung up the phone and looked at the framed photo on his desk. It was his daughter, Luna, smiling on a swing set just before the accident. "One more, my little one," he whispered. "We're going to save one more." Edward drove to Marcus's apartment without calling first. The investigators report a heavy, damning weight on the passenger seat. He found him on the small balcony, reading a book in French, as if he'd been expecting him all along. The calmness of the scene, the quiet intellectualism, was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Edward. "You planned all of this," Edward said, his voice raw. He didn't bother with greetings as he climbed the short flight of stairs to the modest apartment. From the very first day, Marcus closed his book, marking his page with a finger, and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. It's time we spoke as two men who love the same child." "No!" Edward's control finally snapped. "You lied about who you were. You manipulated your way into my home, into my daughter's life. You used the memory of my wife to honor a promise I made to her," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "A promise you never even knew existed." Edward threw the investigation report onto the small table between them. "I know everything. I know about Luna, your daughter. I know you abandoned your career after she died. I know you've been using other children to try and compensate for your own loss." A flicker of pain crossed Marcus's face, but he did not look away. "You are right about one thing. Every child I help brings my Luna back to me, just for a few moments. But if you think for 1 second that diminishes my dedication to Chloe, you are profoundly mistaken." "How dare you?" Edward began. But Marcus cut him off again, his calm authority an impenetrable shield. "Your wife sought me out because she knew you, Edward. She knew your need to control everything, your demand for cold, scientific answers to deeply emotional problems. She knew you would never accept unconventional methods, so she made a contingency plan. She asked me to promise that if anything ever happened to Chloe, I would find a way to be there for her, even if it meant I had to lie about who I was to get past your walls." Marcus reached inside his apartment and returned with a worn, yellowed envelope. "Camilla wrote this for you. She asked me to give it to you only when the time was right. I believe that time is now." Edward recognized his wife's elegant handwriting immediately. With trembling hands, he opened the letter. "My dearest Edward," the letter began. If you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come to pass, and our beautiful Chloe needs help. It also means you are fighting that help, because it doesn't come in a form you recognize or approve of. Please, my love, for her sake, stop. Stop trying to fix Chloe and just start loving her. Let Marcus help. He understands a pain that, thank God, you do not. He lost his own little girl, but I believe he can save ours. Trust him, trust me. Tears streamed down Edward's face, blurring the words. Why didn't you show me this from the start? Because you weren't ready to hear it, Marcus said gently. You needed to see Chloe smile again first. You needed to see that there are things in this world that your money cannot buy and your control cannot command. At that moment, Edward's phone rang, shrill and urgent. It was Clara, the head housekeeper, her voice frantic with panic. Mr. Blackwood, you need to come home right now. It's Chloe. She's gotten out of bed. She's trying to walk on her own, and she says she won't stop until Marcus comes back. Edward felt the ground disappear from beneath him for the second time in as many days. I'm on my way, he choked out. He looked at Marcus, his eyes pleading. You have to come with me. Not as your employee, Marcus said, his voice firm, drawing a clear line. I will come as your daughter's doctor, as the man your wife entrusted with her care, and as an equal who will no longer be treated as an inferior for trying to save your family. During the tense, silent drive back to Beverly Hills, Edward finally asked the question that had been burning in his soul. What is it you truly want from me, Marcus? Marcus was quiet for a moment before he answered, his words measured and precise. I want you to stop seeing the color of my skin before you see my competence. I want you to stop assuming that because I am a black man who was driving your car, I am not qualified to care for your child. And most of all, I want you to admit to yourself that you spent 6 months paying the best specialists in the world, but you fired the only one who made a difference because he didn't look the way you expected a doctor to look. The words hit Edward with the force of a physical blow. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that his prejudice ran deeper than he had ever imagined. He had judged Marcus not just as an employee, but as a man, through a lens clouded by stereotypes he didn't even know he held. When they burst into the mansion, they found Chloe in the hallway, clinging to her wheelchair for support, but standing on her own 2 feet. She was trying to take small, shuffling steps, tears of pain and determination streaming down her face. "Chloe!" Edward cried, rushing toward her. She held up a hand to stop him. "No, Daddy, I have to show Marcus. I have to show him I didn't give up." Marcus approached her slowly and knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "I always knew you wouldn't give up, little butterfly," he said, his voice a soft murmur, "but you don't have to hurt yourself to prove it to me." "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice small and full of a desperate hope. Marcus looked up at Edward. The decision, the power, was no longer his. It was Edward's moment of reckoning. He had to swallow his pride, his prejudice, his entire worldview. He had to choose. "Marcus," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to apologize for what I've done, for my prejudice, my arrogance, but if there is still a chance, I would like you to come back, not as my driver, as the doctor my wife chose, as the man who made my daughter smile again." A slow, genuine smile spread across Marcus's face for the first time. "Only if you promise me one thing. Anything." "The next time I teach Chloe to dance," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling, "you will dance with her too. She needs her father, Edward, not just her doctor." And there, in the hallway of the mansion that had been a cold, silent tomb of grief for so long, the first bricks of a new foundation were laid. It was the foundation of a strange, broken, and beautiful new family, learning that love knows no prejudice, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine is the humility to accept help from wherever it comes. 2 years later, the Blackwood mansion was unrecognizable. The formal living room had been transformed into a state-of-the-art therapy center, filled with music, laughter, and colorful equipment. It was the headquarters of the Butterfly Project, a non-profit foundation created and funded by Edward and run by Dr. Marcus Vance. It provided free, cutting-edge music and movement therapy to children with neurological disabilities. Chloe, now 10, walked with the aid of sleek carbon fiber crutches, but she danced without them. Her laughter was the constant, joyful soundtrack of the house. "Daddy, we're teaching the new boy how to do the spin today," she announced, bursting into Edward's study. "He's scared, but I'm going to show him that dancing in a chair is beautiful too." Edward smiled, a real easy smile that reached his eyes. He remembered a time when he thought it was impossible for someone in a wheelchair to dance. Marcus had become more than a doctor. He was the brother Edward never knew he needed, a partner in a mission that had given his life meaning. During meetings with investors, Edward now made a point of telling the truth. "I almost destroyed my daughter's only chance at happiness because I judged a brilliant doctor by the color of his skin," he would say, his voice steady. "My prejudice almost cost me everything." The first graduation ceremony for the Butterfly Project was held in the mansion's grand ballroom. 23 children, all with varying degrees of physical challenges, completed the program. Chloe, as the guest of honor, performed a dance she had choreographed herself, a beautiful, flowing routine that brought the entire room to its feet. "2 years ago, I thought I would never be happy again," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "Today, I know that being different doesn't mean you are less. It just means you fly your own special way." Marcus watched from the side of the stage, his eyes glistening with tears, remembering his first words to her. Some butterflies fly differently, but they still fly. Edward had lost some friends from his old elite circle, people who couldn't accept his partnership with a black man or the transformation of his home. But he had gained a real family and a profound purpose. "Prejudice isn't just an injustice against others," he said in a national news interview. "It's a prison we build for ourselves." When I finally saw Marcus for who he truly was, I didn't just save my daughter, I saved myself. The Butterfly Project grew, serving hundreds of families a year. Marcus published his methodology, making it available for free to doctors around the world. Edward discovered that building lives was infinitely more rewarding than building a fortune. The mansion, once a silent monument to grief, now pulsed with music, laughter, and hope. And Edward Blackwood had proven that the best revenge against one's own prejudice is to transform it into a bridge to a better, more compassionate world.